Hey everyone, thank you for clicking on the second episode of the BuildingNotes podcast. I just wanted to preface this one by saying that it is with the guest Dr. Chen. We actually filmed this episode a few weeks before our first podcast, and we are deciding to put it out now. Dr. Chen is a physician who worked on Wall Street before going into medicine. We get into many topics like the future of tech and healthcare, general life advice, and his unique professional journey. We hope you guys enjoyed listening to it as much as we did recording it. Thank you, and we appreciate all the support. Right. So our guest today is Dr. Chen. I've had the privilege of knowing Dr. Chen for the past few years throughout my college years, and we still talk today about certain topics. He's been a mentor of mine. Someone just guided me in terms of thinking about medicine and everything that has to come with it. So thank you, Dr. Chen, for being on today. Um, we'll go through a few topics, but let's just start by introducing ourselves and I guess you more specifically about your background, really who you are and what you do currently.
Sure. Um, so I'm a physician. I practice full time in the specialty called occupational medicine. I'm an internist by training. I've worked in emergency rooms, convenient cares, and now occupational medicine. I did my undergraduate degree in molecular biophysics and biochemistry at Yale. I went to medical school. I did my internal medicine at the Johns Hopkins Hospital System. And I'm currently working in a large multi-specialty hospital system. I've also been a medical director of an insurance plan, and I've overseen a smaller clinic and managed the physician group there.
Yeah, so you talked about your main job really being you an occupational med doctor. Do you want to dive into that a little deeper, just for anyone who's listening who might not be aware of what that specialty is, as it's something that I assume is, I guess, not as popular as something like internal medicine or
So it's
primary
a
care.
very small uh, specialty. In a quick sort of summary, is it takes care of everything related to people working in their occupations, whether it's an injury that happens at work or whether it's monitoring their exposures to chemicals, noise, other sort of hazards at work. For example, firefighters, police, people who work with chemicals, they come in routinely for checkups, blood work. Uh, see injuries like any ER or walk-in clinic would that happens at work. Um, Kind of think of it as an urgent care center for work-related injuries.
Right, right. And you mentioned that portion of it where you're going to be working with professionals and those work-related injuries. How is that unique? That part of your job where you're going into these certain facilities, what kind of insight does that give you? And, is that unique to your job as an occupational med doctor?
Yeah, they were one of the few physicians that actually leave the clinic and go into an employer's site, like a factory. We take a tour, we ask questions, we look at how products are made and what employees are exposed to in that process, such as chemicals or
Right.
machinery. And then we look to kind of see how they've gotten injured and maybe how to prevent that injury.
Does this usually work on
Right.
like a um basis where you kind of get employed for like a longer duration? So you kind of it's like almost like a case study where you like read up beforehand on like everything going on and then you kind of have them as um like I don't want to say customer, but something like a customer where you kind of you know these people already before you go into the situation, or is it like I guess like like a firefighter or something? You go to a scene you may be unaware of and you'd have to like kind of get to speed really quick. How does that work?
So, a couple ways. First, I would say there's two environments where occupational medicine physicians end up. One is like where I'm at now. It's part of a multi-specialty clinic. It's a freestanding clinic, and people come for service. The other model is the clinic is set up in a large factory like Caterpillar, United Airlines, UPS. So the employers actually own the clinic
Mm.
and people who work there. And in those settings, for example, like a Caterpillar location, they would have a chief medical officer, several physicians, a few dozen nurses. They would have multiple sites, much like a mini clinic would. And their sole purpose is to take care of their own employees. It's almost like a mini healthcare system set up for their own employees, versus the model here where we take care of multiple employers and their employees. Um, but in terms of what you mentioned, um, I guess the usual scenario is in my situation, I would see an injury. Let's say someone cut their hands. I would find out where they work, and if I have not been there before, I would request to go take a tour. Let's say it's a meat processing plant where they cut meat, and I've never been there before. Um, our director would call, set up a meeting. We would go tour the plant and look at how the meat is processed and kind of look maybe at the exact site where the person got his injury, and then offer suggestions for how they could maybe improve the safety so that it doesn't happen again.
Got it. Yeah, so that process seems pretty iterative and different than what a lot of physicians do. Like we mentioned, why this field and what about it, keeps you going? I know your history was as an emergency medicine doctor. Talk about those switches and why you felt like you didn't want, you know, um, to maybe stick to one part of medicine your whole career and that evolution, what led you to these different places in your medical career?
Yeah. So one of the uh, one of the interesting things about the work that I do is I get out of the clinic and I try to find ways to prevent injuries. Okay. Not all
Mm,
doctors do that. I mean, the typical emergency medicine doctor may sit there and see 10,000 injuries in his life, but not do anything to prevent the next one, right? You just sit
right,
there and you treat them. Um, I make the analogy that a firefighter basically just responds to fires and they douse it with water and they put it out. The firefighter doesn't necessarily try to figure out a better way to prevent the fire, right?
right,
Uh,
right.
so at once it could be frustrating that you keep putting out fires, but you don't actually prevent the fires from happening. So in what we
Yeah,
do, we actually work with the employer, and sometimes if you can find a mutually agreeable solution that decreases the injury rate, you don't see as many injuries anymore from that particular location. And I feel that that's much more rewarding in the long term, knowing that you've made a difference. Uh, yeah, the analogy in healthcare is it would be like the public health system. You work on
mm,
things to prevent infections from spreading in the community, and that probably saves more patients than actually sitting in the convenient care and prescribing antibiotics all the time.
right, right. It's like the whole idea of putting the fence at the top of the cliff instead of waiting for people to fall off of it. Um, sort of, preventative style. Why don't more doctors ascribe to that mentality? And is it just the fact that, more patients in the office drives profit, or is there other factors that you see? Um, I assume it's much deeper than one person, what they want to do with their money, but, how do you view that issue in terms of doctors not taking that initiative to really be advocating for preventative health?
Yeah. So one thing I tell all my doctor friends is there's nothing to keep them from picking up the phone and calling the employer to find out more, right? More
Mm,
about what caused the injury, more about how they could help prevent it, etc. But not all of them have that motivation.
mm,
Kashuk and I have had this discussion before. Why do you want to go to medical school, right? A lot of kids want to go
right,
there. Some of them really don't know why. They just get good grades and they keep heading there because that's what their parents want or what society tells them is the right thing to do. Um, but if you really ask, why? what's the reason that you want to go? I get a lot of uh, responses along the lines of, I want to help people, right? Or I
Mm,
want to cure diseases. Or, you um, for those people who really want to help the most and who really want to prevent disease, becoming a doctor is the wrong profession. It's
mm,
counterintuitive. Actually, if you go into public health or government, you will be able to affect the health of more people and prevent more disease than any single doctor can in his lifetime.
right.
So, uh, one of the reasons is why I like what I do is I can help prevent diseases and
Mm,
actually make a bigger difference that way than continuing to see injury after injury.
right. Okay, so I guess digging a little deeper on the motivations for one to be a doctor. Let's say you were to ask, a few physicians that you might know that, are in it for the right reasons and you respect them as doctors and whatnot. What sort of commonalities do you see between physicians that are enjoying their job and that you seem, I guess, like fit to be physicians? And, what would their answer to be like? Why did they become a physician? Why did they, stay as doctors?
Well, if you ask most of the Asian or Indian doctors that I know, the answer parents wanted me to become a doctor, right? I
Mm,
think that's a universal answer. Um,
right.
most people don't know what it's like to be a doctor until they become one, unless their parents are a physician or someone in the
Mm,
family, right? Really don't know what you're getting into until you're 90% of the way there. Um,
mm,
Probably the same with law school, being a lawyer or a judge. Um, so I always encourage people to better explore the profession that they want to get into by
mm,
actually shadowing, uh, having the opportunity to literally see what you'll be doing in the future. Because all the pre med courses and the things that you do to get into medical school really aren't what you're going to do when you become a doctor.
How was that
right.
delta for you, as you went through like school and then transitioned to be a doctor? Did you feel like, oh, this is just completely not what I thought it was, or what were the
Yes.
steps leading there?
Yeah. So to give you my sort of experience, uh, when I went through college, I had no intention of becoming a doctor necessarily. My sort of thoughts on my career were not necessarily in this order, but a musician, a gymnast, an architect, a bioengineer, and then going into business, sort
Mm,
of in that sequence. And every year or so it changed. It was affected by people around me and what I thought was interesting. And ultimately, when I graduated, my degree was molecular biophysics and biochemistry, which is pretty techy and science oriented. But my interest was in business. Okay, I actually accepted a job on Wall Street. Um, Back
mm,
then, they would hire anyone graduating from a good college, more or less for your brains, not necessarily for your degree. Um,
right.
but before I actually showed up for my first job, uh, I got a phone call from a researcher that I was working with when I was an undergraduate, and she called and said that two of her friends were going to start working at a startup company started by two Nobel Prize winners, and they were basically going to try to use uh, recombinant DNA technology to make drugs. Okay, I thought it
Yeah.
was interesting because it was doing something with the stuff you learned in the textbook, and it
Mm,
was a startup company, and it was a business, and it was something new that no one else was really doing at the time. So I called and canceled my first job uh, and took this second sort of offer. Showed up. Long story short, a year later, I decided I wanted to go to medical school. because of the type of research they were doing and how the physicians were involved in that research. Um,
Mm.
so that's when I decided to become a doctor. And it wasn't until after college, and it was sort of a chance happening that made, otherwise, I'd still be on Wall Street probably.
When you
Right,
say
right.
you saw, oh, sorry, when you say you saw like the physicians working with that specific kind of research, can you expand upon that? Like, what did you specifically see with
Yeah.
physicians and the research?
The conversation I had actually was with the janitor, and the janitor came in one night at 8 o'clock and asked me what I was doing. I explained I was doing research, and he thought it was strange that I was working so late. And he asked me how much money I made. I gave him a number, and his immediate response was he made more money than I did. Okay, so that got me
Yeah.
thinking. Pretty smart kid, graduating from an Ivy League school, was making less than the janitor in the building. Okay, doing research, and so began asking some of the more senior scientists there, you know, what was their path? How did they get there? A lot of them had MD, PhDs, and what kind of
Mm.
research they were doing, and um, how were the doctors involved in the research? Because it seemed like more of the people had PhDs around me. Some of them had MDs, but a lot of times the products that we would make would be shipped to a hospital for a trial, right? And
Mm.
only the MD hospital actually did the clinical trials. So I asked whether you could do research as a physician, MD, or a PhD, or did you have to have both? Ask those kind of questions. At the end of the day, they said you just needed an MD, and if you had to pick one or the other, the MD degree would allow you to do research and see patients, which the PhDs could not do.
Right.
That's when I sort of decided if I were to pursue research, I would become a physician and get my MD degree, and that's when I applied to medical school.
So coming from someone who like does, I'm not in the pre-med track. I did computer science at U of I, but it's interesting for me to hear that you actually went into becoming a doctor with like an initial idea with of research and looking at how that would be an opportunity. So I think that's pretty interesting. I didn't something I didn't know. Um,
Yeah, so you're probably aware UIUC has a medical school now with an engineering bent where they try to bring in engineers and technical, what I call hard science types who graduate and train them to become physicians. Okay,
mhm,
an interesting combination, um, trying to take advantage of today's sort of technology in computers, AI, machine learning, material science, robotics, taking all of that engineering science and applying it towards medicine. Uh,
mhm,
they didn't have uh, uh, all of the above back when I was graduating. They had computer science, but computers back then were the big kind. Okay. Uh, they had software programming, but that was very, very rudimentary and basic. Um, So, fast forward a few decades, the computers are faster, quicker, smarter. The materials that you can use to create devices are more sophisticated. So, applying a lot of our current technology to solving healthcare problems actually is becoming quite interesting. Um, you know, I wander around campus kind of poking my head in, which is how I met you guys. uh, at student groups, professors, research talks, kind kind of trying to find out more about what people are doing and to see if I can give them the view of what a physician sees and whether they can apply their talents and knowledge to solving clinical problems that we have day to day.
Yeah. So, that's something that, I kind of want to do in the future in terms of, marrying that technology side with the medicine aspect of it as well. I guess throughout your career now, where do you see technology heading? Are you on the side of optimism and it kind of taking over? What does that look like for you in terms of how you think about AI in medicine? I know there's some optimists that we've talked about, like Vinod Khosla, who has like a 150-page document about how it's going to take over. What side are you on in terms of the AI in medicine, and how do you see that taking over?
Um, so I think it's actually quite fascinating that you can get machines to start uh, learning things and creating things. Um, I've seen where the machines can, just because they're faster and they're capable of doing so much volume of calculations in a short period of time, by brute force, basically, they can figure things out um, quicker
Mm,
than the doctors. They can read x-rays nowadays, they can predict outcomes, they can look for warning signs that'll lead to a clinical problem showing up. They
right.
can help diagnose conditions. So I think all of the above will embed the computers into the delivery of healthcare in the future. um, I think it'll make healthcare more accurate. It'll make it faster.
Yeah.
It'll make it more accessible. Um, if everything goes well with regulations and reimbursements and safety.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
so there's obviously a difference between like the technological solution that society or like technologists might come up with and the actual adoption into hospitals and the actual practice. So, I mean, we hear about all these like crazy detection that we can do and the surgeries that can be done with robots, but from your perspective and experience, where are we? Like where are we with technology and AI incorporated into medicine, I guess?
Um, I'm not quite sure I understand the question, but I'll give a stab at it. So, hospital systems are using machine learning AI to predict outcomes. So, in other words, let's say you have someone who comes into the hospital, they're having chest pain, possible heart attack, and comparing that person to 1,000 other people that the hospital has treated in the past, based on their age, their sex, their presenting symptoms, some of the laboratory work, what their EKG looks like. The computer can predict, for example, whether this person will do well or has a high chance of dying,
Mm,
just by looking at all the previous statistics and comparing. So that's one use. And that's probably in use in different arenas today already.
Hmm.
Okay. So you can predict the outcome based on 1,000 similar cases like it. Okay. Um, you can predict uh, things like sepsis. Okay. Sepsis is where you have a blood infection. Um,
mm,
it's hard to determine because the early signs are kind of vague. You don't feel well, you have a fever. It could be anything. Sepsis is not the highest thing on the list, but it's probably the most deadly. So
mm,
the machine, there are several software algorithms already where the machine, meaning the computer and all of the labs and all of the notes from the doctors in the hospital are fed into a program. And the algorithm starts to flag cases when they feel like the person may be heading down the path of getting a systemic infection, sepsis. Um, and it's not based on a bacterial culture. It's not based on what I call the traditional markers of blood infection. Um,
mm,
a lot of it's based on the nurse's notes. For example, it'll track everything the nurse says. It reads the note and tries to what I call pull some intelligence out of the words. What words are used, how often is bad or doesn't look good used, and is there a change? If the past 3 days it says Mrs. Smith looks healthy in the morning time, and on today's note, the nurse's note says she looks a little pale and she's really tired. That change
mm.
can mean something. So these algorithms actually can flag sepsis 6 hours before the doctors think of it.
That's pretty cool that
Got
you
it.
you mentioned that it's not based off like the actual like maybe bacteria culture or whatever. Like you say, it's based off the nurse's notes, which kind of kind of like it makes me feel good in a sense because it's like we're still utilizing the skills of the people themselves. Like the nurse's notes and the observations still matter, and the technology kind of aids that rather than what maybe people who are outside of medicine may think like replaces it. So
Yeah.
that's
So,
interesting.
so I think I've told this story to Kashuk before, but let me tell you why I'm not optimistic and why I see that as a negative. It takes a
Mm,
machine now to read the nurse's notes and tell the doctor that something's wrong, right? It
Hmm.
used to be that the doctor, first thing they would do when they show up is ask the nurse, how does the patient look today? Okay. When I did my training 4 decades ago, when you went into a room, the first thing you did was grab the clipboard and then ask the nurse if anything changed overnight, right? You'd listen to the
mm,
nurse, and when the nurse said she doesn't look good this morning, that meant something. Okay. I would
mm,
bet you that no doctors ask the nurse in today's world what happened to the patient last night because everyone's busy on their own computer typing in stuff and no one reads anyone else's stuff because the way the record keeping system is set up. They round at different times, they document different areas of the note. They don't read each other's notes anymore. So now you have to have a computer basically say, hey, go read that note.
mm.
So it's like
Got it.
compartmentalizing the different
Yeah,
wheels of the healthcare system. Hmm.
Yeah, yeah. So that teamwork aspect we talked about, that human, I guess, like having that medical intuition to know what to do in certain situations. Do you think that's being lost in the modern education system, in medicine
yeah,
because of the technology that's being introduced? Yeah.
yeah. So you have a lot of new technology. Some of these new tests are really good. MRI scans, certain blood tests to look for things. They're very good tests. Okay.
Mm,
But I think because of that, the doctors start to get lazy uh, and
mm,
they don't use their skills to kind of figure it out without those tests. Okay. In the old days, basically the doctors would tap on you, listen to everything, feel here and there, and based on an hour's worth of time with you, both talking with you and examining you, they could sometimes come up with a hypothesis of what you had with no tests. If you look at
right.
modern day docs, basically spend 10 minutes with you, listen to what your main complaint is, like chest pain, and then they start pushing buttons and order tons of tests. Okay. They depend on the
Yeah.
tests to make the diagnosis. If you've ever seen on an airplane where the pilot calls for a doctor to show up because someone's down, right? You can have a
Mm,
cardiologist show up and someone's laying on the ground, and the cardiologist has no idea what to do because he doesn't have a
mm,
stethoscope, he doesn't have an EKG machine, he doesn't have all his fancy tools, and he can't draw blood.
right. Right.
Super
Yeah. And
useless, you know.
yeah. So, you're talking about the 10-minute time slots that patients nowadays get, and maybe that's contributed to the loss of medical intuition. How did we get here? Talking to other physicians, they say the same where, they said they had the time and they actually got to spend 80+% of their time actually treating patients. Well, now it seems like you guys are on your electronic health record more than not. So how did that happen, and what's that evolution look like in terms of maybe insurance companies and Medicare and Medicaid kind of playing a whole role in that?
Yeah. So about a decade ago, maybe a little bit more, someone thought it was a good idea to electronify the healthcare system.
Mm,
Back in the 80s, 90s, 2000s, everything was on paper. I would
mm,
jot notes, probably 4 or 5 lines of notes on a piece of paper, and that basically consisted of my documentation. Um, Criticism was you couldn't read the doctor's notes, papers start to fade, you can't transmit paper really quickly. So, the general statement that creating an electronic record is more accurate, that statement is accurate, okay?
Mm.
But it's not efficient, okay?
Right.
So 10 years ago, in an 8-hour day, I could see 30 to 35 patients. Today, with an electronic medical record, I can maybe see 18 at the most, almost half,
Mm.
okay? And it's because of the inefficiency of the electronic medical record. They make up for
Right.
that by billing twice as much, okay? And so it's a net wash, but basically you've made the entire healthcare system 50% less effective by burdening them
Mm.
with entry of the information to go into the electronic medical record, okay? Is it more accurate? Yes, but it's less efficient, okay?
Mm.
So, uh, is that trade-off worth it? You know, well, to the people who like documentation, to the insurance companies who want to see every little bit of what you did before they pay you, it's worth it
Mm.
because now they can see all that detail and they don't really care how long you've spent with the patient, right?
Right.
They just want to see all the documentation. Um, to the uh, people who employ us, the administrators, they like it because they can bill for more things if you document more things. Before, in the old days, when I just hand wrote a few lines, they couldn't bill as much because they couldn't verify that you did a lot of things during that visit. Okay. Now they can
Right.
verify that you did, they can bill more for it. Okay. So they like it. And they're the ones who actually chose to install the systems. None of the physicians wanted electronic medical records. It was an
Mm.
administrative decision to layer that on. Um, it was to help them, not to help us. Okay. The software that is currently used, there are basically two or three main software packages. They're all inefficient because they're all written 3 or 4 decades ago. The software code is
Mm.
very old. Okay. There are things that a modern iPhone does that these things can't do. Um, There, it's inefficient in terms of how it's written. It's inefficient in terms of order entry, how you input the data, and it's not liked by a lot of the clinicians.
What it, I mean, I would assume that there is a lot of newer technology that people could make to somewhat be better, I would say, but how come you don't think that adoption happens for hospitals? Like, there's no incentive to get newer technology?
Newer technology, as in the electronic.
Like, yeah, yeah,
Okay, so you're familiar with Microsoft, right?
yeah,
Okay. Um, are you currently working at a job?
yeah, yeah,
You work for a place. Do they use Microsoft products
yeah,
on computers? Okay.
yeah.
Uh, how likely do you think it is that someone can displace Microsoft and come up
Hmm.
with a package that your employer would choose that's non-Microsoft? How likely is that to happen?
Yeah, pretty unlikely, probably.
Yeah. What's the reason?
Because it works, kind of like it does what you
Because
need it to do.
They're
what
used
you
to it.
have already, okay,
Yeah.
everyone else uses what you use. It's interchangeable. You can send documents, and it's
Mm.
nice to have a where everyone is on Outlook. Everyone uses Office and Word, right? You have a Word document, it's sent to you, you open it up, there's no issues, right? You don't have to convert from one format to another. So, uh, and then Microsoft's big, right? They have more money than you do to market and to. So if there is a startup that's trying to displace Microsoft, guess what they're going to try to do?
Buy them out. Yeah.
They'll either buy them out or they can competitively offer products tied to their current system that you can't live without. Okay.
Hmm.
Mm.
You've heard of Zoom, right?
Yep.
Microsoft is literally trying to out Zoom by creating Teams. You know what Microsoft Teams is? It's
Yeah.
basically
Yeah.
Zoom copycat, right?
Mhm.
And if you look at what's happening in the marketplace, the adoption of Teams is skyrocketing, and the use of Zoom is nosediving
Mhm.
because they're tying to the rest of their products. Okay, so to try to create a software that can compete with Epic will require, number one, that it's better. Okay, there's a lot of work to be done and has to be better. Number two, you have to convince people to switch. There's switching costs to throwing
Mhm.
the old system and retraining everyone on the new system, right? And then there's issues of marketing and competition. You'll have to compete with basically the most expensive software package that's out there, and they have billions of dollars.
Mhm.
Yeah.
No one's
So,
keeping you doing it. If you're a computer science major and you can create the replacement for Epic, I'm writing the check, okay?
yeah, I've heard a lot of physicians kind of voice their opinions about Epic, and none of them seem to be positive. What can AI do to help that? Is there integrations that you think that could help, Epic be less painful for physicians to use? Does that get better or does it just get worse?
I think the only thing that will make it less painful is narcotics.
You might have to self-administer, yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. Like the biggest part about AI that interests me in medicine going forward is the dynamic between the PCPs as well as the specialists. Right now you go see a primary care specialist, your primary care doctor, you're most likely going to be referred to a specialist for whatever it may be. You don't, does that change with AI? People like Vinod Khosla say that there's going to be a massive shift and there's only going to be PCPs that are really going to be useful because they're going to have the expertise with the AI that kind of um, puts those other specialists at risk. What do you think happens within that relationship, and does it stay similar to what it is today?
Well, so there's a lot of ways to kind of address that. I do think that AI is smart enough now that, the old term for AI was Dr. Google, right? You would
Right.
Google it and try to figure out what you had, right? And Dr. Google was decent, as long as you went to reputable sites, you can kind of sort of figure out what you had. Um, I've had a lot of people sort of figure out their own disease by just Googling it. Right? So
Right.
I think in one sense, if you ask the computer the question, I have these symptoms and what have you, what do you think I have? And the AI computer gives you an answer. Um, I think we're already there. It's probably 80 or 90% correct, but
Mm,
the current problem is they can't tell you because it's not a doctor, and our U.S. governmental regulation system doesn't allow the computer to tell you the diagnosis. Okay,
mm,
it's the same law for nurses. Some nurses are so experienced they know the same thing that the doctors do, but they can't tell you what you have. They can't tell you your diagnosis because that's not what their degree is. They'll tell you you have to wait
mm,
till the doctor comes to tell you. Um, so I don't think the regulators are going to allow this new AI to really tell the patient what they really know and think. They can say,
mm,
well, it sounds like you may have an infection and you need to see the doctor, or that chest pain is concerning and you need to go to the emergency room. But it can't tell you you're having myocardial infarction, okay? Because it's
right.
giving you a diagnosis. I don't think the doctors, the AMA association, will allow it either, just because they don't want to lose their jobs. But I think that the systems are as accurate, if not more accurate, in total than the human doctor is, or soon will be. I'll make the analogy that the autonomous driving cars are probably safer overall than human drivers overall, in terms of
Mm,
what percent get into accidents, because humans make mistakes, right? Um,
Right.
AI doctor is going to make a mistake, and that's going to be considered unacceptable to society until you're 99.99 some percent accurate. But doctors are not that accurate, so why does the machine have to be more accurate? I don't
Right.
quite get it. Teslas still crash, but they crash at a lesser rate than human-driven cars. You know, but some people are saying that Teslas are unsafe on autopilot. Well, it depends on what your definition of unsafe is, right? I think that where AI is going to evolve is it will eventually become the front door to the healthcare system. You will either Google it yourself, or and it will give you a vague answer, like go to the emergency room or wait till tomorrow. Or the doctor's office will use a version of AI. And as you're sitting in the waiting room, you talk to the machine. Machine will
Mm.
ask you a bunch of stuff and then format it all for the doctor when you're in the room with the doctor. Okay, it'll be the sort of the pre-doctor prep. Um, so I think that once they get good enough, the healthcare system will embrace these AI agents. And before you can even come in to see the human doctor, you have to go through the computer. And if the computer
Mm.
says, don't worry about it, you'll never see the doctor. Okay. It'll be used
Right.
as a screening tool, right? And if the computer says, hey, this guy needs to see the doctor now, they will make an appointment for you now. Okay, which doesn't happen. You have to wait 2 weeks or 2 months to get your appointment now. Um, so, in that sense, I think it'll be used more effectively as triage to either
Mm.
hold you off and away from the system if it's not sounding urgent, or to bring you in really quickly if it does sound urgent. And in that regards, as a triage agent, it'll it'll be very helpful.
Okay.
That's a long answer.
Okay. So then, yeah, no, that makes me think, what does a good doctor look like then? I know you talked about, what is a good doctor before, and you've, told me to think about what a good doctor means to you, but, what do you feel like is going to change? What does a good doctor look like now? And um, I feel like with AI, there has to be some sort of change that has to happen in terms of how physicians think, and or maybe I'm just mistaken, and really it's just an addition, a tool in the arsenal.
Yeah, so I think it's going to be a tool. I do think that whether it's 10 years from now or 50 years from now, I actually think the machines will be better than the doctors will be. Um, and so there may be a future where there are no primary care doctors. You don't go in for a yearly checkup anymore. You just talk to the computer. If you're feeling fine and nothing's bothering you, why are you in the doctor's office anyways? I ask that question
Mm.
all the time. Half the people that I see are there for healthy checkups, and I'm shaking my head like wasting your time and my time,
Mm.
right?
Mm.
I wonder
Yeah.
I wonder if as time progresses, like doctors will turn into almost technologists in feeding these machine learning models and teaching them how to be that better doctor that of the future, and it would be more of like a symbiotic role where I don't think it would be fully replacing, but I think there'd be like a new kind of job. um I don't know.
Um, so I don't know. I'll use a couple different analogies, right? Race car drivers, okay? Um,
Mm.
they're talented, right? They have to take a lot of inputs. They have to see what's around them. They have to try to decide how the landscape is changing in front of them and what they're going to do next. Okay.
Hmm.
Uh, Quarterbacks, same thing. Okay. Second by second, as what's in front of you evolves, you got to make decisions. Do I go left? Do I go right? Do I throw the ball? Right. Um, so healthcare is kind of the same. You have something that's in front of you. It may not be as fast action as a race car driver, but you have something sitting in front of you and it's evolving. Okay, the story is evolving. what the person is complaining about or what's wrong is evolving. You order some tests, and more information comes at you, and the landscape changes again. And so you're navigating yourself through a landscape and trying to decide what to do next. Do you throw the ball? Do you turn left or right? What test do I order next? Right? You're analyzing the situation. My argument is a computer can do that 1,000 times quicker than I can. Right?
Hmm.
So imagine in the future that you have a person in the room talking to the computer, and the computer's immediately going through all of those possible pathways in the background. And every word you say changes the path that it possibly could be taking, right?
Hmm.
And so let's say you're sitting there and you're talking, and the computer says, well, this could be a heart attack. I'm going to draw blood right now. So as you're sitting in the chair, it draws blood from you. Okay, it immediately goes to the lab, and the result pops up 30 seconds later. You don't have to wait till tomorrow for the lab test. I mean, it's there right away. So if you have the machine and the computer and the labs and the x-ray available immediately, okay, and as the story evolves, the computer decides which of those things to do and does it immediately, okay, you can come to a decision much quicker, right? Uh, so in the future, when you go backwards, it'll look like the healthcare system was in slow motion. Okay, right now, what happens is you come in, you say, "Oh, sounds like you have a heart attack. I'm gonna push the button and admit you upstairs." Okay.
Right.
12 hours later, you show up upstairs. Then a new team of doctors asks you the same questions, and they say, "Oh, sounds like you're having a heart attack. Let's order these lab tests." Push the button. The lab tech shows up an hour later. Okay. The labs usually don't start hitting the computer until 2 hours to a day later. So it's a whole day later now. And basically, you've just paid to have labs drawn, tell your story 2 or 3 times, and rest in bed that costs $10,000 a day. That's very inefficient.
Yeah.
Okay. If I had a clinic and I had x ray machines and lab machines, and I wanted to figure out what you had, and it was of national importance, okay, I could come to a diagnosis within an hour if I could pull all those resources and coordinate them quickly, right? That's not how the healthcare system works right now, you know. So my point is that with computers, all the decision making could happen in real time, much much quicker. Um, if you've watched any of these new uh, aircraft, drones, or race cars that are automated, they have electric race cars that race themselves around a race course with other race cars, right? Uh, their decision making is much more quicker. The computer's deciding things. Do you pass left? Do you pass right? Do you accelerate? How much battery um, level do I have left? Uh, so they're actually better drivers than the human ones are. Um, it's almost boring to watch it because they don't make mistakes, right? If you have
Yeah.
autonomous race cars race with each other, they don't crash,
Yeah.
Right. Right.
you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. So when talking about that, then you've talked about the human element of medicine. How important is that now? And that's, I feel like when people make the argument that AI can't replace physicians, that seems to be the main argument where the human element matters. They want to talk to a human when getting their medical advice and treatment. How much of that is really important now? And do you feel like that's going to be
Well,
staple?
they used to say that the machine couldn't beat the chess master, right?
Right, right.
To say the way the machine could beat someone at Jeopardy, right? One by
Yeah.
one, those things have fallen, right? I think it's just a matter of compute power, okay, uh, and knowledge base, and time. You know, uh,
Mm,
we just can't compete with the speed and the volume of information that a machine has. We just can't. You know, um, so you can make the argument, well, the doctor knows that rare disease that only happens 1 in a million times, and only he can recognize it. Well, a little bit if that is just BS, right? Um,
mm,
that 1 in a million rare disease may be just not programmed into the computer. Well, if you program
right.
all those rare 1 in a million diseases into the computer system that's designed to look for it, um, it'll eventually catch all those little missed errors, right? I
Yeah,
just think
yeah,
that we, especially doctors, just can't live with the thought that the machine could be better.
right, right. And it seems like, that's becoming commonplace in other industries, but as you said, medicine seems to kind of move slower than the rest. But I don't doubt that there's gonna be some drastic changes, especially in 20, 30 years. Um, so, in medicine today, I guess taking a step back, what are some misconceptions that you see, that might be holding a few people back, whether it be, um, you know, the cardiovascular disease or obesity or whatnot that's plagues America? What are some misconceptions and things that people have just assumed to be true that kind of hurts them more than helps them?
Um, I don't want to answer that wrong. Phrase that for me differently.
Sure. So, you know, when people think about health or think about how to be healthy, what should people be thinking about, and what should people keep in mind as their kind of North Star or guiding principles that maybe may have been construed through, whether it be social media or just internet in general that seems to replace doctor at times for medical advice?
So, if I'll paraphrase, are you asking like what the average person should do to improve their own health?
Yes, to a degree, but I guess the thing I'm kind of pointing at is, or I'll give you an example. During the COVID era, people might say there was a lot of misinformation, physicians couldn't be trusted, this, that. There was people on both sides. Um, where do you think those issues come from, and what should people keep in mind when thinking about their health while balancing the things that the internet tells them versus what the physician tells them? Um, and is that something that people should really kind of monitor?
Well, okay. So I'll take a stab at it. I think that in regards to personal health, uh, some of the some of the important points I always like to make is that the doctor isn't the one that's going to keep you healthy. Okay,
Mm,
it's you. Um,
right.
most people have the mistaken idea that if they get sick or when they get sick, you go to the doctor and he's the answer. Okay, I turn it around and say, well, if you never showed up in the first place and lived a healthy life, you wouldn't be sitting here in front of me. So I always say,
Mm,
eat well, exercise, and just be careful in terms of what you do from a safety perspective. Um, from an information perspective, I always think you need to go to reputable sources, whether it's
mm,
politics, whether it's medicine, whether it's fixing your own car. You want to go to sites that are known to be good for what they are. Okay.
mm,
Um, Part of the problem of information in today's world is these algorithms on all these apps just show you more and more of what they think you want to see or what you saw already. So if you're seeing skewed information, it'll send you more skewed information. And that's why you have this polarized world where you have believers and non believers and everything.
right.
Uh, I don't know that the average Joe reading what they read understands that they're being led to believe something because you're just traveling down that pathway. Um, and they're not listening to both sides of the arguments, right? So whether again
Hmm.
it's politics or global warming, vaccines. I can make you a believer or a non-believer just by showing you more and more of a certain type of news feed, and eventually you'll be brainwashed. Which is what's happening
Right.
in today's world. So in terms of health, my my main advice is go to a reputable site. The big ones like Mayo Clinic, uh, the big institutions. They're presumably going to tell you the truth, right? Uh, I wouldn't necessarily go to sites that are uh, a person who was an expert, quote unquote, like who
Mm,
declared him the expert. I wouldn't necessarily go to sites that are trying to sell you something. You know, if
mm,
the site is sponsored by the vitamin pill company and the answer to COVID is vitamin C, well, is that really non self serving, right?
yeah.
So you need to be aware of these things. But unfortunately, I don't think the general public has enough knowledge to be aware of that.
Yeah, I think I heard somewhere
Yeah.
where someone was saying like their advice to these kind of like online things is like ask yourself who wins, like by me reading this. And then if you find that reason to be not self-serving, then you might get one step closer to being in the right place. So
Yeah,
it's kind of interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. So,
I
okay. When you're,
yeah, I think some of the answer is we have to regulate, or we have to find ways to uh, rate the truth, if you will. Okay,
Mm,
rate these sites or to rewrite these algorithms where instead of just showing you more and more and more of the same thing, the algorithms just show you random uh, sites or
mm,
random information, or alternate between one viewpoint or the other.
mm,
yeah. Yeah, me and Sid talk about this frequently, but we feel like there's a lack of debate and a lack of intellectual conversations that happen, especially, um, within classrooms. There seems to be a pretty homogenous group in terms of what everyone believes, and the rest get outcasted. Do you feel like that's the case, whether that be in medicine? Do you feel like that discourse isn't happening as often as maybe it used to, or what do you think about the general mentality that people have, with their opinions nowadays, especially that social media can make you go fully one way or the other?
Well, I'll use the example of my clinic, the subject of politics, the subject of vaccines, all that comes up in the clinic room sometimes. And, they'll ask me what I think. The patient will ask me what I think. Um, it's usually pretty obvious within 10 seconds what they think. And
Mm,
it's a hard sell to try to get them to see the other side of what they think. Okay.
mm,
Um, I've had people come in that are diehard, anti-vaccine people, and they'll ask me, "Did I get a vaccine?" Right? And I'll say, "Yeah, I did." Well, then the next 30 minutes is spent discussing, you know, uh, who's telling the truth and it's a conspiracy and all that. Uh, I try to, you know, tell them my side in terms of what I know about vaccines, how they're created, and all that. And, probably only 10% of the time do they switch their mindset after I've sort of presented all the facts, right? They still think the
right.
federal government is trying to inject chips into them through the needle, and when I say things like, "Well, technically that's not possible. You can't make a chip that small and put it into the needle, right?" And they'll come back
Hmm.
with some other. Um, they're truly brainwashed, and
Mm,
they can't see the other side. They've been fed 99% of what they've seen and now believe it. It's just this steady stream of, what I'll call lies or untruths, and they believe it now.
mm,
So that's hard. Now, when you talk about school environments, I'm not sure. I can't say I've been in a classroom, but most of the students I've met are not shy to, give me their opinions. Um, they may be less
okay.
likely in the classroom to argue with the professor, if their grade
Right.
depends on it, right? Unless it's a debate class or something like that. But
Hmm.
um, so I can see where maybe students don't challenge professors on things, but I see them talking amongst themselves. Um,
When you're talking about
Yeah.
talking to patients and kind of like them coming in with like a certain viewpoint, do you think that's like a nature of just humans, or has that sort of changed with your kind of experience in talking to patients over the years?
um, I'm not sure. Say, ask me that again in a different way.
Yeah. So like maybe 20, 30 years ago, or were patients more likely to like be able to get their mind changed than they are now, just from a medical perspective?
Well, so that's interesting. I think 40 years ago, 30 years ago, we all heard the same news from one of
Hmm.
three ABC, NBC, or CBS TV stations.
Hmm.
Okay, there basically weren't other sources. Um,
Right.
I guess it would be the equivalent of today's, Twitter and Facebook and what have you. So uh, everyone heard the same news, and everyone saw basically the same pictures and the same videos, just broadcast on different channels. So if you looked at the Vietnam War, you saw the same videos no matter what channel you changed the TV to. You'd have different broadcasters there saying certain things, but they would basically just repeat what the facts were. Um, Back then, they didn't ask sort of questions like, "Do you feel like the Vietnam War is moral?" Right?
Mm.
They would just say, "This is what happened, and this is what the president ordered, and our troops are doing this or that." It was reporting of facts. Okay, so the whole country heard the same thing.
Hmm.
Now, you can hear the same thing and disagree about, why we're in this war, and then have protests and all that, but we all heard and saw the same thing. Okay. In today's world, we're not all hearing and seeing the same thing. Okay. We're only
Mm.
seeing the curated version of what someone wants us to see and to hear. Right. So we're getting opinions and we're getting viewpoints from different sources, and therefore I think our view of things are even more polarized. So before,
Hmm.
you everyone heard this, and people could take sides, and their sides were like this. Okay,
Hmm.
now I think
Mm.
people are hearing this. Okay, they're already separate streams, and their
Right.
opinions now are way to the side
Hmm.
because
That's actually, yeah. Sorry, keep going.
they're even more polarized now to the extremes than they are ever in the past.
I wonder if
Right.
it's also like because we have so many more like input streams, people don't have like the ability to see the whole sphere because the sphere just got so big. But like you said in the past, like if there's only three news sources, you got the three experiences. There was no other experience that for there to see. So that's pretty interesting.
Yeah. You
Well, to
know,
be fair, if you ask people where they get their news, most people
mm,
get it from one source, maybe two,
Hmm.
right? I mean,
Hmm.
most people don't browse 10 different sources of information, right? And if you just look at your own habits, I mean, where do you get the news?
Right.
It's usually from a favored stream or app, right?
Hmm.
Uh,
hmm
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. But when you were mentioning the three news sources, that made me think about, I guess, some of the attitude that younger people have today, which is a little bit more anti-establishment, and I think that's just a nature of growing out of college and seeing things maybe a little bit differently. Did that mentality exist when you were growing up? For the younger people, was there that questioning of the
yeah,
status quo that went beyond? Yeah, talk about that.
I, I, I think that all youth uh, question the status quo and the establishment, whether that means your parents or whether that means, politics and government. Um, just because in that sort of what I call hormonal phase of your life, you question things like,
Mm,
when you think of parents, I always think of these National Geographic TV shows, right? You see the little baby gorillas uh,
mm-hmm.
playing with each other, then they're pushing each other, then they're basically challenging Papa Gorilla for the crown, right?
Right.
At some point,
Yeah.
you get big enough physically and mentally that you start challenging things like who says you're the boss, who elected you as
Yep.
president, why are you the club president here? Who says you're better at basketball than I am? I mean, you challenge things, especially
Right.
the males, and so you question, you know, uh, which in some sense is a good thing. Like, why does it have to be this way? Um, the and it's okay to question and challenge and to kind of push back a little bit, but I always in an organizational structure, I always say to those people, okay, it's fine for you to challenge, and if you disagree and think this is wrong, that's okay. What's the answer then? You tell me what the answer
Mm,
is. Okay,
yeah.
it's okay to challenge things and to complain and say this isn't right and unfair, but what's the answer? You know, is there a better answer?
Mm,
If you don't have a better answer, then quiet down and help us solve the problem or come up with a better answer, right? Um,
yeah.
so I think part of the popularity of the current Republican candidate is his challenging the establishment, right?
Yeah.
Okay, I I get that, and a lot of people are fed up with the current sort of establishment because it's not in the people's interest. But voting
Mm,
for the candidate that's anti-establishment doesn't get you a better answer, right? It gets you just
mm,
someone that's different, and in this case, a little bit far out there. But that's why people
yeah.
vote for him. They're anti-establishment. They don't like the status quo. Okay, but the new
Mm,
guy doesn't have a better answer.
Mhm.
That's the
I
problem
see.
for you know.
What do you say to those people that might say the establishment isn't letting the new answers come out, if that makes sense? The answers aren't as easily implemented because the establishment is so overbearing. Um, is that a valid argument? And have you seen that before?
Well, if you talk about the U.S. government, um, I think some of the rules that govern our government um, are outdated,
Yeah.
right? The
Mm,
Constitution and the law were basically written a few hundred years ago, and they have not kept up with the times. So part of what we're seeing is the inefficiency of the actual establishment as it was set up. And until we decide to change that, change the rule, we're going to be stuck with this inefficient establishment. And you have these impasses, you have these disagreements, you have nothing being done because everyone's following the rules, but we can't get past a deadlock, right?
mm, mm. Yeah.
So there's this
Right.
really need to rewrite parts of the Constitution or the nuanced regulations around it.
Okay. Yeah. Interesting. So, what do you say to the 22 or 23-year-olds? Do you find that getting into politics and some people say, I forgot the saying, it goes something like those who know politics govern you or something like that. Was politics something you focused on when you were younger and thought about the world, or you saved that for kind of once you had a career and whatnot?
Um, I believe that you should spend your time and effort trying to change things. If you truly believe in something, whether it's global warming,
Mhm.
universal health care, if there's something that you truly believe in, you should fight for it. But at the same
Mm,
time, you have to be aware of uh, you have to pick your battles. Okay,
Mm.
you can't win everything. There's not enough time in your life to do everything, right? You have to pick your
Right.
battles. You have to decide when you do and don't pick up your, when you negotiate, when you just live with what it is, because there are other things to fight for that are worth more, right? So, in an organizational setting, like an institution, you'll have to decide what committee you're on. You have to decide whether you argue your point about this particular topic or not. You know, in politics, you have to decide what law you vote for or not, and sometimes you have to give up something to get something later, and that's what politics is all about, right? So, in a certain sense, working in a large institution and trying to accomplish something, it's politics. It's internal politics, and you have to either convince people that your point is the better one and they should follow you, or sometimes you'll have to sacrifice and say, well, I understand your point as well, and how about we compromise and do this in the middle, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So on that
Yeah.
note, like what are kind of on that note, like what are the kind of the things that you're taking on right now in your kind of life?
uh well, so Kashuk and I've had this discussion. By age, I'm near retirement. um, I don't have to put up with the system much longer if I don't want to. Uh, and it's one of those things. If I were 35, I would put up the fight just because I have a whole career ahead of me, right?
Hmm.
Oh,
Mm.
sort of my perspective is this isn't my fight anymore. It's the younger doctors have to fight for what they want because they have another 10, 20, 30 years ahead of them. They're the ones who really should be deciding their future, not me,
Hmm.
right?
Mm.
Um, I have thoughts about what they should fight for, but it's not my fight anymore, right?
Hmm.
Mm.
So from a personal perspective, I'm sort of I accept the system for what it is right now, and I manage within the system. Um, uh, there's certain things I still believe in, and I sort of fight hard for that. Um, and there's other things where I
Yeah.
think they're important, but I don't have enough time in the day to fight for those things. You know,
Hmm.
so I
Right.
spend more of my time instead of fighting for those things. I spend more of my time doing things that I enjoy doing, which is wandering on campus and helping student groups, with their projects, uh, trying to educate them about like where they're going and why, um, trying to connect them with doctors to help with their projects or to help them decide what they want to do in the future. Um, I think that's more meaningful, and I help more people make the right decision by doing that than
Mm.
sitting in a healthcare system that's huge and bureaucratic and arguing on committees for things that really at the end of the day don't don't make too much of a difference.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. I wish all the hospital CEOs had the same mentality of not deciding our future, but here we are. Um, in terms of, I guess, your other passions, what do you do outside of work? What do you do outside of maybe mentorship that you find, you've always done, or um, eases your stress, or anything you enjoy?
Yeah, so a lot of things sort of crisscross. I like photography. Um,
Mm.
I like it for the art. I like it for the the saying I used to use amongst all the physicians is, uh, and or administrators is, the best physician or the best administrator is the one who can see the big picture. And there's no better way to see the big
Mm.
picture than to do landscape photography. Okay, you have to see everything. You have the
Yeah.
panoramic view of things. So, photography is one of those, and my two sort of my niches that I think I'm good at are landscape photography, where you see the
Mm.
wide angle view of things. I like close up macro photography where I see things in detail with a close-up lens, and you can make the corollary to real life that you see the bigger picture and you have a better understanding of what the meaning is, but at the same time you like to focus on details and look at the nuances of little things that make up
Mm.
that big picture. Right? So actually, I head up a physician special interest group at the place I work, where all the physicians who are photographers get together and talk to each other. It's kind of
Oh wow,
Very
uh,
nice.
all
that's fun.
paths, right? Yeah. So
Right.
talk about photography, something you like to do, philosophically talking about both details and the big picture. Um, so that's one thing. As far as the student entrepreneurship thing, I do it on this campus as well as on two other college campuses. So I traveled to New Haven, my old alma mater,
Wow.
Yale, and I just came back last week. So I have student projects on other campuses as well, and see
Mm.
how those crisscross. The student group I met last week, there are Yale's a liberal arts school. It's not as techy as UIUC. So they were looking for a program to help them write the code for their app. And I offered and they accepted. So I'm actually looking for a UIUC programmer that can help them write their app. Um,
Got it.
so two teams across the campus that maybe put together something that would be of interest, right? Um,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
then a lot of my old alumni friends, they're venture capitalists or they've worked at banks and they're investors, right? So when I talk with them, a lot of times what's interesting and what's new, I talk about my projects, and then sometimes I can get some of those people to get interested in the projects that I'm looking at, which helps them make money and also helps the student kind of raise funds for what they're doing. Again, crossing sort of all the paths of my alumni network, the different schools that I belong to, the student groups that are interested in certain things, um, and trying to get to know who needs what to make their project successful.
Yeah. Sounds to me that, you've had a great time facilitating these discussions, and uh, I feel like you've been a great help, especially for all those student groups that I've talked to on campus. So we appreciate it. It's something that keeps the whole ecosystem going for sure and kind of keeps us motivated. That's kind of getting us to the end, right, Sid? Is there anything else you wanted to say?
No, no, I think that's good. I mean, once again, thank you for that. I think one of the main reasons we were so interested in talking to you was because I've heard from Kaushik, like, just how kind of involved you were with like, well, you are with like schools and student groups and stuff. And I think it's really motivating for people who um, are trying to like do something new in school and stuff to get that help from people with a lot of knowledge. And I think that's hard. Being someone who I was an entrepreneur a couple of years ago trying to start like some sort of app, and I just remember it being so difficult, feeling like I didn't know anything. So I think that's really helpful for students.
Yeah, and uh, as a kid, as a student, you just don't know what you don't know,
Right.
right? And then sometimes I think I see that it's been very helpful when they stumble across something that I'm doing, and we have a discussion. I hear the expression, "Well, I would have never known that." Uh, no one else that I've ever talked to sort of has pointed that out to me, right? It's just real life sort of experience that I think when you in your aggregate can summarize a lot of what you've seen or done and give them some direction of like, will this be successful or not? Why won't it? Or what else do I need to think of to make this more successful? Or do I need to pivot and change the way I'm looking at this problem? Uh, that can really save a student or a project, hours, if not years worth of effort, um, by not going down the wrong path, right?
Hmm.
But I have this question that I debate, are the students going through the process to learn from the process? Okay. And do
Hmm.
they want the shortcut. Okay.
Hmm.
And you get different answers. Some people think that it's worth making the mistakes, worth
Hmm.
going the wrong path so you realize it, right? If you never go down the wrong path and every choice you make is the correct one, it expedites some things, but you don't learn some things either,
Yeah.
right? Right. So, for example, iVentures or any of the other student groups, you know, is the process important, and is failure within the process part of the learning?
Hmm.
We just curate the environments for the students so that they never make the wrong choice. Okay, you keep guiding them every time they come to a decision tree. You push them in the right direction. If you continue to do that, there's certain things they won't learn, right?
Yeah. I think another part of that you kind of said that kind of sparked something was like there might even be innovation in the gaps between like what may have previously led to failure could be a point where they pivot something that
Yeah,
and then change their idea, and you would never know if they already had the answers that would lead them away from that.
right. So I see a lot of projects where they, and 5 years later, they're entirely different than what they started out as.
Mm-hmm.
I see that both as interesting as well as sad. Sometimes they pivot for the wrong reason. It's about money, right? They have a
Mm-hmm.
very interesting project with higher goals, and they've pivoted somewhere because it's the money question. How you gonna make money, right?
Right.
So some projects I hope that people do because it's the right thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't make money, but it's the right thing to do. If I told you the right thing to do is to write the replacement software for Epic, the
Mm-hmm.
software that we use, but you'll never make money, but 1,000 doctors will love you, would you do it?
Right. That
Right.
that's
I think
tough, right?
a doctor in the United States will write a check for the other option, okay, in aggregate, but but if it didn't make you tons of, would you do it? It's hard to get software programmers to work for you if you promise them they will never make money, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, well,
So,
thanks so much, Dr. Chen. We appreciate all the tidbits. Yeah, go ahead, finish your thought if you need to.
oh no, no, I'm going to tell you, I after we're done here.
Sure, sure, sure. Awesome. Appreciate it. Thanks so much for all the tidbits. Yeah, that was really helpful. I think I learned a few things I never knew about you, especially the photography stuff. I'm glad you're doing something outside of wandering the halls of U of I. So I appreciate it. Thanks so much, and we'll see you guys next time.